The Naga's claim. The engine of the dredging barge coughed, sputtered, and finally died. The sudden silence was a physical weight, heavier than the monsoon air that pressed down on my skin, thick and wet like a shroud. For a moment, the world was just the slow, syrupy slap of the Tonle Sap River against the steel hull and the frantic, electric thrum of a million cicadas screaming from the dense jungle lining the banks. It was a sound that could drive a man mad if he listened too closely. My name is Rith, and for 6 months, this barge had been my world. A world of rust, diesel fumes, and the endless churning of mud from the riverbed. We were deepening the channel, they said, for progress, for bigger ships to bring wealth up from the sea to Phnom Penh. To me, it was just a job, a way to send money back to my mother and sister in our village near Kampong Chh Nang, where the water was a giver of life, not an obstacle to be conquered. Bong Chi, the foreman, swore under his breath and kicked the generator housing, a hollow clang that did nothing. He was a good man, but impatient. The city had made him forget the patience of the rice paddy. Useless junk, he grumbled, wiping a greasy hand across his forehead. Try it again, Rith. I pulled the cord, nothing. The silence rushed back in deeper this time. It felt watchful. I straightened up, my muscles aching from a long day under the relentless sun. My worn krama was soaked with sweat, plastered to the back of my neck. I looked out over the water. The sun was bleeding into the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. The river, usually a muddy, forgiving brown, looked different tonight. It was dark, almost black, and swirled with an oily rainbow iridescence I'd never seen before. It reflected the evening sky with a clarity that was unsettling, making the moon, just a sliver, seem too bright, too close. That's when I smelled it. It wasn't the familiar cocktail of diesel, silt, and Bong Chi's cheap cigarettes. This was something else. It cut through the humidity, a scent both beautiful and rotten. It was the heavy, cloying perfume of lotus blossoms, the kind you offer at the Wat on Pichum Ben, but underneath it, faint and sickly, was the smell of decay, the smell of something that has been left in the water for too long. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Bong Chi, I said, my voice barely a whisper, do you smell that? He grunted, still fiddling with a fuel line. Smell what? The river? It stinks, Rith. It always stinks. Now help me with this. But I couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on a spot in the water, about 20 meters from the barge. The spot where yesterday our dredge had hit something hard. There had been a sickening crunch that had vibrated through the entire vessel, a sound like ancient stone shattering. Bong Chi had cursed the delay, blaming it on undocumented bedrock. He ordered us to push through it. We worked for another hour, the grinder screaming, until the obstacle was gone, pulverized into the silt we were pumping away. At the time, I'd felt a pang of unease, a cold knot in my stomach that had nothing to do with the midday heat. A whisper from my grandmother's stories, tales of spirit houses and sacred places hidden beneath the earth and the water. But the need for a paycheck is a loud noise that drowns out old whispers. Now standing in the unnatural silence, I knew we had broken more than just rock. The smell of lotus and rot grew stronger, and the oily patch on the water seemed to be spreading from that exact spot, a wound bleeding strangeness into the river. The cicadas stopped their drone, all at once. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath. And then a new sound began. It wasn't from the jungle, and it wasn't from the barge. It rose from the depths of the river itself. A single feminine voice chanting. It was not a language I could understand, yet every syllable felt familiar, resonating not in my ears, but in my chest, a low vibration that traveled through the soles of my feet, up through the steel deck of the barge, and into the marrow of my bones. It was a song of immense sorrow, of loss that spanned centuries. Bong Chi finally looked up, his face pale in the twilight. What is that? Is that a radio from the shore? I shook my head, unable to speak. My gaze was locked on the black water. The chant grew louder, clearer. It was hypnotic, pulling at something deep inside me, a primal part of my soul that understood its grief. The surface of the river began to bubble, not with air, but with a thick, dark slurry. The smell was now overwhelming, a funereal perfume that filled my lungs and made my head spin. "Rith, what is happening?" Bong Chi's voice was tight with a fear he was trying to hide. I wanted to answer him. I wanted to tell him to start the emergency motor to get us away from this place. But I was paralyzed, held captive by the song from the deep. My eyes were fixed on my own arms, slick with sweat and river spray. In the strange, iridescent light reflecting from the water, my skin was changing. It started near my wrist. A small patch of skin seemed to ripple, to shimmer. I thought it was a trick of the light, a drop of water. But then another appeared, and another. They were small, overlapping, like the petals of a tiny, perfect flower. They caught the moonlight and glowed with a soft, pearlescent sheen, the color of the inside of a seashell. Scales. Beautiful, terrifying scales were blooming across my skin, a mosaic of the river's claim. The song from the water intensified, and I felt a sharp, itching pain as the transformation spread, a network of impossible beauty creeping up my arm. I looked down into the swirling black mirror of the Tonlé sap, and for a heart-stopping second, the face that looked back was not my own. It was ancient and feminine, and its eyes held all the sorrow of a lost kingdom. The chant was no longer just a sound. It was my new name. I tried to scream, but the only sound that came out was a gasp of water. The river was calling me home. The next few hours are a blur of fever and fear. Bong Chi managed to get the small emergency motor running. It sputtered and choked, but it was enough to pull the barge slowly, agonizingly, toward the small makeshift dock we used near the village of Prek Kadam. He kept his distance from me, his eyes wide with a terror that was far more isolating than any anger could have been. He would glance at my arm, which I kept hidden under my shirt, and then quickly look away, muttering prayers to spirits he claimed not to believe in. The chant had faded as we moved away from that cursed spot on the river, but it hadn't left me. It was a dull hum in the back of my skull, a ghost of a melody. The itching on my arm had subsided, but the scales remained. They were cool to the touch, smooth and hard. Under the dim light of the barge's single working bulb, they shimmered with greens and pinks and blues. They were undeniably a part of me, grafted to my skin as if they had always been there. When we finally docked, I scrambled off the barge before Bong Chi could say a word. I didn't want his questions. I didn't want his fear. I just wanted to run. I stumbled through the sleeping village, my heart hammering against my ribs. The familiar sounds of the night, the croaking of frogs, the barking of a distant dog, felt alien, as if I were listening to them through a wall of water. Every shadow seemed to hold a serpentine shape. The smell of jasmine from a villager's garden was twisted in my mind, mingling with the memory of phantom lotuses. I didn't go to the small room I rented. Instead, I went to the one place that felt safe, the one person who might understand the language of spirits and ancient waters. I went to the village Wat, the temple, hoping to find the old abbot, Luong Ta Soun. The Wat was quiet, bathed in the soft silver of the moon. Incense smoke, old and comforting, clung to the air. I found him not in his quarters, but sitting on the steps of the main vihia, looking out into the darkness as if he were expecting me. He was ancient, his skin a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes were as clear and deep as a forest pool. He didn't seem surprised to see me, a disheveled worker reeking of fear and river water, arriving in the middle of the night. He simply patted the stone step beside him. "The river is awake tonight, little nephew," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. He didn't use my name. It was a term of endearment, but it also felt like a statement of fact. I was a child of this land, of this water." I sat, my whole body trembling. I couldn't find the words. How do you tell a holy man that the river is singing to you, that your body is betraying its own form? I pulled up my sleeve, my hand shaking, and showed him my arm in the moonlight. Luong Ta Sound leaned in. His old eyes traced the pattern of the pearlescent scales. He reached out a bony finger and touched one, his touch surprisingly gentle. He did not wrinkle, he did not gasp. He simply nodded slowly, a profound sadness settling over his features. "Ah," he breathed, "the sorrow of Ning Nik." The name sent a shiver down my spine. A Ning Nik, a Naga princess, the mythical serpent beings, the protectors of the underworld and the waterways. They were in all the stories my grandmother told me, carved into the walls of every ancient temple, but they were just stories, weren't they? "You were dredging near the old bend in the river," Luong Ta Sound stated. It wasn't a question. "Where the water runs deep and cold." I nodded, my throat tight. "We hit something yesterday, a structure. Bong Chi said it was rock, but it felt different. It felt like breaking a bone." "You broke the gate," the old monk said, his voice heavy with finality. "For 1,000 years, the palace of the Naga Queen has slept beneath the silt, a temple of a fallen kingdom given to the water as an offering for peace. Her palace, Prasat K Bal Nik. To break its gate is to tear open her tomb. It is to remind her of all she has lost." He explained that the legend was not just a story. The Naga Queen had lost her king in a great battle. In her grief, she had flooded their capital, taking it with her into the river's depths to guard it for eternity. She slept, but her sorrow remained, a powerful force trapped in the cold darkness. The chanting I heard was her lament. The scales were her tears, her claim. "She does not seek to kill you, my boy," Luong Ta Sound said, looking at my arm again. "Her nature is not one of simple vengeance. It is one of possession. Her kingdom is broken, so she will make a new one. She has marked you. You carry a piece of her sorrow, a piece of her water, a piece of her home within you. She is calling it back." A cold dread, far worse than the initial shock, seeped into me. This wasn't a curse that could be broken. It was an adoption, a reclamation. "What can I do?" I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Is there an offering, a ceremony?" Luong Ta Sound was silent for a long time. He looked from my face to the dark, distant line of the river and back again. "An offering of apology must be made. Flowers, incense, prayers at the river's edge at dawn. You must show her your remorse. You must beg her to release her claim." He paused, and the sadness in his eyes deepened. "But the Naga's memory is as long and deep as the river itself. Her sorrow is an ocean. Be warned, Rith. Once she has touched you, you will never truly be a creature of the dry land again." I spent the rest of the night at the Wat, huddled on the cold stone, the monk's words echoing in my mind. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I was underwater. I saw towering spires of a temple not made by human hands, covered in iridescent scales instead of stone. I felt the crushing pressure of the deep, yet I could breathe. The lamenting chant was the only sound, a constant, sorrowful lullaby. I woke up gasping, my skin feeling tight and foreign. Before the first hint of dawn, Luong Ta Sound woke me. He handed me a bundle of lotus blossoms, incense, and a small, folded piece of saffron cloth. His instructions were simple, but his expression was grim. "Go alone, do not show fear, only respect. Speak from your heart. Apologize for your ignorance, for the violence of your machines. Let the river hear your regret." I walked to the river's edge, my legs feeling like lead. The air was cool and still. The water was like glass reflecting the pale pre-dawn sky. The oily sheen was gone. For a hopeful moment, I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare. Then I looked at my arm. The patch of scales had grown. It now covered my entire forearm, reaching past my elbow. The individual scales were larger, more defined, shimmering with a life of their own. My hands trembled as I lit the incense, the fragrant smoke curling into the still air. I knelt at the water's edge, placing the lotus blossoms gently onto the surface. They floated for a moment, perfect and white against the dark water. "Ning Neek," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Great princess of the water, I am sorry. We did not know. We are ignorant men of the surface world. We were blind. Forgive our trespass. Forgive the noise of our machines, the breaking of your sacred gate. I ask for nothing. I only offer my deepest regret. Please release me." I bowed my head, my forehead nearly touching the damp earth. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the world wake up. A bird called from the trees. A fish jumped somewhere in the distance. The sun began to warm my back. Nothing happened. Slowly I raised my head. The lotus blossoms had vanished, not floated away, vanished. The water before me was undisturbed. A sliver of hope, fragile and thin, flickered within me. Had she accepted the offering? I spent the day in a state of nervous tension. I couldn't face Bongchi or the barge, so I stayed in the village, keeping my arm covered. The scales didn't spread any further. The phantom chant in my head was silent. By evening, I allowed myself to believe it was over. Perhaps my apology had been enough. Exhausted, I returned to my small rented room and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up in complete darkness, not the normal darkness of a room at night, but a thick, oppressive blackness that felt wet. I couldn't hear the crickets or the frogs. I couldn't feel the lumpy mattress beneath me. I could only hear the chant. It was no longer distant. It was inside me, around me, a symphony of sorrow. Panic seized me as I realized my room wasn't just dark, it was flooded. Cold, silty water was up to my chest. My bed, my clothes, my few possessions were all submerged. The water wasn't coming from outside. The door and window were sealed shut. It was as if the river had seeped through the very floorboards, rising up to claim me. I thrashed, trying to stand, but my legs felt strange, heavy and fused together. I cried out, but the sound was a choked gurgle. The water was rising fast, now up to my neck. The smell of lotus and decay was thick, suffocating. In the black water, something luminous began to glow. It was my own body. The scales now covered me from my feet to my chest, each one a tiny, pearlescent lamp. They had spread while I slept, a silent, relentless colonization of my flesh. I looked at my hands. My fingers were elongated, the skin between them webbing. This was not a release. The offering was not an apology accepted. It was an invitation. The water closed over my head. I opened my mouth to scream, to inhale a final, desperate breath of air. But instead of the searing pain of drowning, my lungs filled with water as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The pressure in my chest eased. I could breathe. The walls of my small room seemed to dissolve away, the darkness receding to reveal the impossible architecture of a sunken world. The spires from my dreams were real, towering columns of nacre and obsidian, home to phosphorescent plants that swayed in a current I could now feel against my changing skin. And she was there. She wasn't floating before me as a woman or a serpent, but as a presence that filled the entire vista. Her face, miles wide and made of shimmering water and sorrowful light, looked upon me. Her eyes were twin moons of ancient grief, and in their depths, I saw the fall of her kingdom, the death of her love, the long, silent centuries of slumber. The chant was her voice, speaking directly into my mind. You broke my silence, you woke my sorrow. The world of sun and noise has forgotten us. It has forgotten the respect the water is owed. You carry my tear, you are my tear. You will not return to their world. You will be my eyes, you will be my hands. You will be the new guardian of the broken gate. The transformation surged, a final, agonizing wave. I felt my bones lengthen and fuse, my spine elongating into something powerful and sinuous. My human thoughts, my memories of my mother's face, the taste of Nomban chalk, the feeling of dry earth under my feet, they were all becoming distant, small lights in a vast, deepening ocean of consciousness that was not my own. My name, Rith, was just a fading echo. I was becoming a sentinel, a creature of sorrow and duty, a prince in a drowned kingdom of one. My purpose was no longer to send money home, but to guard a broken stone gate at the bottom of a dark river forever. The last thing I saw with human eyes was my own reflection in the face of the Naga queen. A creature of terrifying beauty stared back, its body long and serpentine, covered in shimmering pearlescent scales. Its face was a haunting mix of my own features and something far older, and its eyes glowed with a cold, green light, filled with a sorrow that was 1,000 years old, a sorrow that was now mine. The next morning, Bong Chi found my room empty. The door was locked from the inside. Everything was perfectly dry, as if no one had been there for weeks. He called my name, his voice echoing in the small space. He told the villagers I had run away, scared off by a bad omen. He was a practical man. It was the only explanation that made sense to him. The dredging project was delayed for a few days, but the pressure from the company was too great. They hired a new worker to replace me, and the barge returned to the deep channel, its machines once again tearing at the riverbed. They never again went near the spot where they had broken the ancient gate. The river there, the other workers claimed, had grown unnaturally cold. The sonar showed strange, deep trenches that hadn't been there before, as if the riverbed itself had been clawed open from below. And sometimes, on a quiet night, the men on the barge would hear a sound, a low, mournful song that seemed to rise from the depths, a song that made the hairs on their arms stand up and filled their hearts with a sadness they could not explain. They learned to ignore it. They learned to work faster. But some stories are not so easily dredged away. They live in the water. They live in the whispers of the old ones. So if you are ever traveling on the Great Tunlei Sap River and the air grows still, and you smell the scent of lotus blossoms where there should only be mud and diesel, do not dismiss it. Do not lean over the side of your boat to look for the source. Because something is looking back. Something with eyes that remember the sun and a body that belongs to the deep. Something that guards a broken palace of sorrow, and it is always lonely. It is always searching for another piece of the world it lost, another soul to share its long, watery vigil. Do not let it see its own sorrow reflected in your eyes. It might decide to claim you too.